branch manager's voice carried across the lobby like he wanted everyone to hear it. "Sir, I don't know what you think this is, but a map from 1947 doesn't override a federal survey from 2019. You're embarrassing yourself." 3 customers turned their heads. A teller looked down at her keyboard. The young man behind the desk smiled the way people smile when they've already decided how a conversation ends. Earl Brennan stood on the other side of the desk in a clean blue shirt, work boots polished for the trip into town, holding a cardboard tube under his left arm. He didn't answer right away. He looked once at the spreadsheet on the manager's screen, then once at the branch manager himself, and then he set the tube gently on the desk between them. "I'd like a copy of the bank's most recent boundary filing," Earl said. "The one your lawyer sent to the county on March 14th. I'll wait." The manager's smile flickered for a half-second, then came back wider. "Mr. Brennan, you can wait all day. The county already accepted our filing. The strip belongs to the bank. I'd suggest you take that thing home and frame it." Earl picked up the tube, nodded once, and walked out of the building. He drove the same truck he'd driven for 19 years back down County Road 12, 8 miles east of Cooperton, and he didn't say anything to anyone for the rest of the day. Earl Brennan was 71 years old. He had farmed the same 237 acres in Carroll County, Iowa for 46 years, the last 12 of them alone since Margaret died in the spring of 2014. The land sat between 2 creeks that fed into the Middle Raccoon River, and the eastern boundary ran along a fence his father-in-law had built by hand in 1958. Earl could still remember helping set the corner posts when he was 8 years old, watching the old man check each one with a level that had belonged to his own father before him. Earl had not been born to that land. He had married into it. Margaret had inherited the original 180 acres from her father in 1979, and Earl had bought the additional 57 acres in 3 pieces over the following 15 years, working a second job at the grain elevator on weekends to make the payments. He had missed his daughter's confirmation in 1986 because he was driving a combine for a neighbor to earn the down payment on the last 22-acre parcel. Margaret had told him once, sitting on the porch the summer before she got sick, that the land knew who'd earned it. He had laughed at her then. He didn't laugh about it anymore. Margaret had been the one who kept the records. She had a metal filing cabinet in the back room of the farmhouse, 3 drawers deep, and every survey, every deed, every easement, every tax payment from 1979 forward was filed by year in folders she had labeled in her careful schoolteacher's handwriting. After she died, Earl had not opened the cabinet for almost 2 years. When he finally did, he had stood in the doorway of that room for a long time before he could make himself walk in. The bank's letter had arrived in early federal savings, the same bank Earl had used since 1981, the same bank that had held the mortgage on the 22-acre parcel until he paid it off in 1998. The letter said that a recent federal boundary survey had identified an encroachment on the eastern edge of his property, a strip of land roughly 180 feet wide and almost a quarter-mile long, running along the old fence line, that the bank now claimed had been part of an adjacent parcel they had acquired in a 2017 portfolio purchase. The bank's position was that Earl's fence had been built in the wrong place 66 years ago, that the strip had always been bank-adjacent property, and that the federal survey had now confirmed it. The strip in question was 11.5 acres. It contained the old creek bed, the line of black walnut trees Margaret's father had planted in 1962, and the small family cemetery where Margaret was buried next to her parents and her grandfather. Marcus Halloway was 33 years old. He had an MBA from the University of Chicago and had been the branch manager at Heritage Federal's Cooperton office for 14 months. Before that, he had worked in the asset recovery division of a regional bank in Des Moines, where he had been promoted twice in 3 years for what his performance reviews described as efficiency in resolving legacy boundary disputes. Heritage Federal had recruited him specifically to clean up what the regional vice president had called, in an internal memo Earl would later see in Discovery, the rural portfolio. There were 1,400 properties in that portfolio. Marcus had a spreadsheet sorted by the age of the deed holder, and he worked the list from oldest to youngest. Earl's case had been assigned to Marcus on January 30th. According to the bank's own internal time tracking system, Marcus had spent 14 minutes reviewing the file before authorizing the demand letter. 14 minutes to look at 46 years of ownership, 3 generations of fence building, and a cemetery containing 4 graves. He had written in the file note, "Holder elderly, no known legal representation, low resistance probability." He had checked a box marked, "Expedite." Earl was not the first. By the time the letter reached his mailbox, Marcus had successfully resolved 19 similar boundary claims in the 8 surrounding counties. Most of the deed holders were over 70. Most of them had paid the bank's settlement offer rather than fight. 2 had died during the proceedings. 1 had a stroke in the parking lot of the Cooperton branch in November and never came back. Earl read the letter twice and then put it on the kitchen table and went out to feed the cattle. He didn't tell his daughter Rachel about it for almost a week. When he finally did, on a Sunday afternoon when she came up from Des Moines for dinner, she looked at the letter for a long time without speaking. Then she asked him if he had a lawyer. He said he did not. She asked him if he was going to get one. He said he was thinking about it. What he did first, before he called any lawyer, was go into the back room and open the second drawer of Margaret's filing cabinet. The cabinet was olive green, military surplus, and Margaret had bought it at an estate sale in 1981 for $14. The drawers slid on metal rails that had not been oiled in 20 years, and they made a particular sound when they opened. A long, low groan that Earl had not heard since the morning he had finally gone in to find her death certificate. The second drawer held everything related to the land itself: deeds, surveys, easements, plats. The folders were arranged chronologically, oldest in front. The folder labeled 1947, Original Plat, Survey, was the second one in the drawer. Margaret had inherited that folder from her mother, who had inherited it from her father, who had commissioned the original survey himself in October of 1947, when he bought the first 80 acres of what would eventually become the family farm. The surveyor had been a man named Henry Becker out of Carroll, who had walked the land for 3 days with a transit and a chain, and had drawn the boundary lines by hand on a sheet of heavy linen-backed paper that measured 24 inches by 36. Henry Becker had signed the map at the bottom right corner in dark brown ink and stamped it with the seal of the Iowa State Surveyor's Office, which had certified him in 1939. The map showed the eastern boundary running exactly along what would, 11 years later, become the line of the fence Margaret's father built. The boundary on Becker's 1947 map sat 182 feet east of where the bank's 2019 federal survey had placed it. Earl took the map out of the folder and laid it on the kitchen table. He sat down and looked at it for almost an hour. Then he made 2 phone calls. The first was to a lawyer named Clara Whitfield in Carroll, who his neighbor Don had recommended. The second was to the Carroll County Recorder's Office, asking whether a 1947 plat survey, properly filed and stamped, would still be considered a legally controlling document. The clerk on the phone told him she would have to check with the recorder. She called him back 40 minutes later and said yes, in Iowa, an original certified plat survey. If it had been filed with the county at the time and had not been formally superseded by a court-ordered resurvey, retained legal weight. She said the standard procedure for resolving a boundary dispute was to compare the original certified plat against any subsequent surveys, and that the original generally controlled unless there was evidence of error or fraud. Earl asked her if she could check whether his survey had been filed in 1947. She put him on hold for 9 minutes. When she came back, she said yes. The 1947 survey had been filed on November 3rd of that year, recorded in Book 47, page 218, and had never been superseded. Clara Whitfield was 46 years old, had practiced rural property law in Carroll for 19 years, and when Earl spread the 1947 map out on her conference table the following Tuesday, she looked at it for a long time before she said anything. "Mr. Brennan," she said finally, "is this the original?" "Yes, ma'am." "Filed in 1947, November 3rd. And you have the recorder's confirmation?" "I do." She pulled a magnifying glass out of her desk drawer and bent over the bottom corner of the map, studying Henry Becker's signature and the state seal. Then she straightened up and looked at Earl across the table. "The bank sent you a federal survey from 2019. "They did." A federal survey doesn't supersede a county-filed certified plat unless it's been entered as the controlling document by court order. "Has any court issued such an order?" "Not that I know of." then the bank's filing with the county is, at best, a competing claim. At worst, it's a misrepresentation of the controlling boundary. Either way, what they sent you is not what they told you it was. Earl nodded once. He didn't say anything. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mr. Brennan, I have to be honest with you. I've seen claims like this before, and they usually settle. The bank will offer you something to make it go away. They'll tell you it's not worth the fight. But what you have here," she put her hand flat on the map, "this isn't a settlement case. This is a county recorder's office case, and then it becomes a federal court case because the bank filed a federal survey in support of a fraudulent boundary claim. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" "I think so. I'd like to file a formal demand with the bank for retraction within 14 days. If they don't retract, we file in district court, and we name Marcus Halloway personally, along with the bank, because the internal documentation will show this wasn't an honest mistake." Earl thought about it for a long moment. He thought about Margaret and the cabinet, and the fact that Henry Becker had walked the boundary 3 days in October of 1947 to draw a line that her father had then built a fence along 11 years later. He thought about the cemetery and the black walnut trees and the strip of land Marcus Halloway had decided was worth 11 minutes of his time. "Go ahead," he said. The federal courthouse in Des Moines was small and quiet, the kind of room with wood-paneled walls and a single American flag in the corner and air conditioning that ran a little too cold. Marcus Halloway arrived first, 8 minutes early, in a charcoal suit with 2 attorneys beside him, both young, both carrying matching black leather folders. He sat at the defense table and looked at his phone until he was told to put it away. Earl arrived 4 minutes later. Rachel had ironed his shirt that morning. Clara Whitfield walked in beside him carrying a single folder and a cardboard tube. They sat down without speaking. Judge Eleanor Fitzgerald entered at exactly 9:30. She had been on the federal bench for 22 years. She was 68 years old. She had read the filings the night before. The bank's lead attorney, a man named Preston Vance, spoke first. He spoke for 23 minutes. He talked about the 2019 federal survey, about modern GPS-based boundary methodology, about the unreliability of pre-digital cartography, and about what he called the legacy artifact of mid-20th century rural plats. He used the phrase legacy artifact 4 times. He referred to the 1947 map twice as the document Mr. Brennan has produced. When he was finished, Clara Whitfield stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "the 1947 plat survey was filed with Carroll County on November 3, 1947. It is the controlling boundary document under Iowa Code 354-11. The 2019 survey was never entered as a controlling document by any court. The bank's claim rests on a survey that has no legal standing against the county-filed plat. That's our entire argument." She sat down. The whole thing had taken her 41 seconds. Judge Fitzgerald looked at Preston Vance. "Counselor, did your client file a motion to supersede the 1947 plat in any Iowa state or federal court?" Preston Vance opened his folder. He turned 3 pages. He turned them back. He looked at the attorney to his left. "Your Honor, our position is that the federal survey constitutes—" "Counselor, I asked if your client filed a motion to supersede." "No, Your Honor." "Then the 1947 plat controls." The judge picked up the 1947 map herself. Clara had filed a high-resolution scan, but she had also brought the original. The judge looked at it for almost 2 minutes without speaking. The room was very quiet. Marcus Halloway shifted once in his chair. Preston Vance did not move. "Mr. Vance," the judge said finally, "the bank's filing with Carroll County on March 14th of this year. Was that filing accompanied by any disclosure that a controlling 1947 plat existed and contradicted the 2019 survey?" Preston Vance looked at his folder again. "Your Honor." "Yes or no, Counselor?" "No, Your Honor." The judge set the map down. Final judgment was delivered 4 weeks later. The court ruled that Heritage Federal Savings had filed a materially misleading boundary claim with Carroll County, that Marcus Halloway had personally authorized the filing, knowing or having reason to know the 1947 plat existed and was controlling, and that the bank's conduct constituted a violation of Iowa Code 714-16 regarding consumer fraud. The boundary was restored. The 11.5 acres remained Earl's. Damages were entered against the bank in the amount of $340,000. A separate sanction of $60,000 was entered against Marcus Halloway personally. The judge ordered that the ruling be circulated to all 1,400 holders in the bank's rural portfolio, with a notification of their right to request review of any prior boundary settlements. Marcus Halloway was placed on administrative leave the following Monday. Within 6 months, 14 of the previously settled cases had been reopened. 3 of them had involved cemeteries. Earl drove home from Des Moines on a Thursday afternoon in late October. The air was cool, and the corn was already in. He turned off County Road 12 onto the long gravel drive, parked the truck, and walked around behind the house and through the gate in the old fence his father-in-law had built in 1958. The cemetery sat under 3 black walnut trees at the top of a small rise. Margaret was buried on the eastern side, next to her father. Earl walked up the rise slowly. He stood at the foot of her grave for a long time without speaking. The wind moved in the walnut trees. "It held," he said. He stood there a little longer. Then he turned and walked back down the rise, through the gate, and into the house. He went into the back room and opened the second drawer of the cabinet. He folded the 1947 map exactly the way Margaret's father had folded it, exactly the way her mother had folded it after him, exactly the way Margaret had folded it when she had filed it the last time, in the spring of 2009. He returned it to the folder. He slid the folder back into its place between 1946 and 1948. He closed the drawer. Then he went out to feed the cattle. If you've made it this far, you understand why a man like Earl Brennan keeps every piece of paper his wife ever filed. You understand that the people who built this country quietly are the ones who saved it quietly too. This channel exists for you. Next time, we're going to tell you about a 79-year-old widow in eastern Tennessee who received a letter from a developer claiming her access road belonged to them, until she walked into the county office with a 1953 easement her father had filed himself, witnessed by the man who would later become a state senator. That story is bigger than this one. Subscribe, and we'll see you there. Paste your script.